we don't
get
have
those
to.
stats.
One or two or three, I don't know. That's fine. It's got all that happened. But is a very recent one. You've got your, everything you need printed, this is all the time for the phone printed. I brought a copy of it. Is that maybe a little on?
Oh, I didn't know.
Nadia, maybe you got it? Yes, maybe. Nadia can't start it, but also there could be.
What do you think?
Could be people here. Sure, yeah,
I think Marlon there.
Right.
Mom can be in the middle because she's not getting out.
Any spare sometimes to take it back to the car.
I don't think so.
Oh, what about the box?
What do we
Yeah.
Still taking care of.
That's mine.
And then the side pictures of them, just don't touch. There.
In a notebook, yeah.
I'm just putting this here. They put that there because apparently there might be a child that wants to speak.
Yeah, but I don't think he's speaking first. So
No,
for
at
the
some
other,
point they said.
yeah.
Seriously? Oh, yeah.
Waves roll on over the waters, and the ocean cries. We look to our sons and daughters to explain our lives, as if our truth could
much biology. Don't know much about science. Don't know much about the French attitude. But I do know that I love you. And I know that if you love me, oh, this would be. Don't know much about geography. Don't know much trigonometry. Don't know much about algebra. Don't know what a slide rule is for. But I do know what it was to. And if this one could be with you, what a wonderful world this would be. Now I don't claim to be an A student, but I'm trying to be. For maybe by being an A student, baby, I can win your love for me. Don't know much about history. Don't know much biology. Don't know much about a science book. Don't know much about the French I took. But I do know that I love you. And I know that if you love me too, what a wonderful world this would be. La ta 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 ta. Oh, la ta 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 ta. Yeah, but I do know that I love you. And I know that if you love me too, what a wonderful world this would be.
Good morning. We're here to remember and celebrate the life of Myron Johnson. My name is Eric. I'm Myron's son-in-law, and the family has asked me to guide us through today's proceedings. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, both in person here in the room and on the live stream. And so first up, Myron's sister Doris will begin today's service by saying a few words about her early memories. So Doris.
If I can read my crib notes here, and the mic is. Thank you, Eric. As he said, I'm Myron's sister, and also you'll have to know I was his favorite sister. I have a few notes myself, some that I remember and some that I got from other family members, and a bit of things that were written down. My mother had told me that Myron was born at about 3 a.m. on June 6th, the Lacklevish Hospital, we know. At that time, they used to keep mums and new babies in the hospital for weeks, almost. And I think she was away from home for probably 3 to 4 weeks. And my brother Lloyd and I were looked after by grandmothers, aunts, and our dad. And one thing that I remember doesn't pertain exactly to Myron, but at the time, that one of our aunts came and gave my brother Lloyd and I baths. We probably needed it if we'd been staying with Dad for a few days. He looked after us well, but I imagine bathing us in the old tin tub up at the farm was a bit maybe beyond what he wanted to do. I remember a few bits and pieces of him, of Myron. I was 5 when he was born, and I remember Mom making baby formula for him. I remember her sterilizing these glass bottles in boiling water and putting together a formula with just ordinary milk, I guess, with some corn syrup in. Now, I don't know anything about that. He evidently thrived on it. Myron was an early walker, I know that, about 9 months. And I think what his granddaughter probably takes after him that way, right? Something else I remember is that he absolutely hated getting his hair cut. I remember him howling away at a haircut. Now, maybe he didn't want it cut or the clippers pulled, I don't know which, but he certainly made a fuss. I remember him kind of dawdling along to school because he was, younger than Lloyd and I guess his legs were a little shorter then. The only time that I remember of getting into a spat with him when we were kids, I don't know what it was about. Evidently, he instigated it. I picked up a spoon, we were at the supper table, and chucked it across the table at him and hit him in the head. Didn't do any damage, but both of us were reprimanded. Myron for instigating it, and me for retaliating. All of these are just kind of little bits that I've remembered. One time Mom asked him what he wanted on his bread, and he said, honey butter jam. And so we used to kid him about that. Always remembered it. He learned to play cards when he was knee-high to a whatever before he started school, played cards with Dad. And I know he loved cards when he was younger, and in his junior high years, there was a group of his friends that did. I don't know if he continued later on, but it was a little card shark when he was like 5, 6 years old. Oh, there's other things I remember, but one thing I wanted to point out about Myron is that he had his own unique sense of humor. Didn't always maybe jive with his siblings. I think sometimes he thought that the crazy little skits and things we did were, he'd kind of roll his eyes, but he had his own humor. And one thing, again, that sticks with me, Lorena, this involves you. He was looking after Lorena, had her at the park or playground or something, I don't remember the details. She fell and cut her head. And of course, Myron took her, to the doctor and was cleaned up and bandaged, I guess. And the doctor said, oh, she shouldn't have a scar, if any. And Myron by then said, well, as long as we can get her married off and out of the house at 16. Guess that didn't quite happen, did it? Another little thing, and this was from a letter I found. Before his 50th birthday, he wrote that he'd gone out and bought a new jacket, new pair of pants, and then he was going to get new shoes. But he was going to wear the shirt that Verna had given him on his 40th birthday. So he ends up by saying, well, I haven't completely lost my good financial sense. Myron, well, as I said, one of my 4 favorite brothers. He was very generous, very good-hearted to all of us. And just a few quick things. He took Mom and the 2 younger our two younger siblings, to Montreal for Expo 67. Drove all the way down, all the way back, and, you know, they still remember that. Brent also reminded me that when Myron was working in Calgary one summer, and Brent happened to be there, Myron was working for the Calgary Albertan newspaper, and that was time when Janis Joplin came through and did an outdoor concert there. Myron got to go as a press representative, and he could take someone else, so he took Brent with him. And Brent said, well, of course, he would never have been able to afford tickets, and he certainly remembered that Myron, you know, he could have taken a friend or someone, took Brent. Another little one involving another younger brother, when in 1970, Myron was backpacking in Europe. He let Bruce, one of our younger brothers, have his car for the summer. Well, Bruce and a whole bunch of us, this is little Carmen Gia, and I think there were 6 of them in the car, gone to a dance or something somewhere. And on the way back, Bruce fell asleep, rolled the car in the ditch and demolished it. Fortunately, none of them were seriously hurt, but Bruce worried sick all summer about how he was going to tell Myron this when he got back. And I don't know just and all what was said, but Myron commented apparently that insurance paid more for it than he would have gotten if he'd sold it. So he didn't get too alarmed, I guess. I just want to end by saying that I have been so very, very fortunate in all of my brothers. Every one of them was good. And Myron particularly, if one of us needed a little bit of assistance with something, Myron was there for us. I will miss him so very much. Thank you. Thanks, Eric. Yes, could have brought my things at all.
Thank you, Doris, for sharing those memories. So now, Myron's son-in-law, Melvin, will read one of Myron's favorite poems by the poet Stephen Spender, entitled The Truly Great.
Yeah, it's good you mentioned that, because I actually prepared a poem because I wasn't sure. But Lorena gave me that, so now I know it's actually some quality. The Truly Great by Stephen Spender. I think continually of those who were truly great, who from the womb remembered the soul's history, through corridors of light where the hours are suns, endless and singing, whose lovely ambition was that their lips still touched with fire, should tell of the spirit clothed from head to foot in song, and who hoarded from the spring branches the desires falling across their bodies like blossoms. What is precious is never to forget the essential delight of the blood drawn from ageless springs, breaking through rocks in the worlds before our earth, never to deny its pleasure in the morning's simple light, nor its grave evening demand for love, never to allow gradually the traffic to smother, with noise and fog the flowering of the spirit, near the snow, near the sun, in the highest fields. See how these names are fettered by the waving grass, and by the streamers of the white cloud, the names of those who in their lives fought for life, who wore at their hearts the fire's center. Born of the sun, they traveled a short while towards the sun and left the vivid air side with their honor.
Thank you, Melvin, for that reading. Next, both of Myron's daughters wanted to eulogize their father, focusing on different stories. First, Myron's daughter Lorena will read the eulogy she has prepared.
So as Eric said, my sister and I both wanted to do the eulogy. And when I told Melvin we're both going to be speaking, he told me, well, you better go first. I said, okay, well, why Melvin? And he said, well, remember our wedding, 10 years ago now, you talked first and you stole all my good stories. So you better go first in case you guys say the same thing. Because anyways, we compared notes, and as far as I understand, Carly's going to be doing a nice start to finish coherent narrative, and I'm going to be telling a series of loosely, confusingly related stories, just the way my dad liked to tell stories. So that's, in a way, that'll be the tribute, and it's also the best my mind could come up with, given the circumstances. So I'll start in early childhood. When I was growing up, my parents were all about the healthy food, and I feel my mom must have had much to do with this, but since my dad got off work first, he would every day, day after day, year after year, would make a salad. That was his thing, and he would make vegetables, and we only got our treats for very special occasions. But I remember this one day, I was maybe 5 years old. He pulled me and Carly down in the basement, and my mom was upstairs, and he brings down this big tub of ice cream and Coke and these glasses and spoons, and he says, "Be quiet. Your mom can't know. She won't let you have these, but you have to taste them. These are Coke floats." And I never forgot that. Somehow he liked his treats, but I guess he was teaching us then, if you combine two junk foods, you make a super junk food that's so good it has to be hidden from mom. So we also went on many adventures, lots of hiking, biking, all over the place when I was a kid. One of his favorite places was the Rockies, and he said once that he wasn't sure if Paris or the Rockies was his favorite place, but did not get to Paris as often. One summer we went to Yoho National Park, which is very, very beautiful. And when I was 28, my dad was 68, we decided to circle back and revisit it. We went on a road trip, and we did this hike. At the time, I was in the middle of running half marathons. I was working as a personal trainer. I was very fit. Like I said, my dad was 68. We climbed this mountain. I can't remember what it is. what it's called, but it was very, very difficult, steep. We were hiking for hours and hours, and it ended with like a hand-over-hand climb to get to the peak. And it was so beautiful, and I remember so painful and awful at the end. I could barely breathe, and my legs were burning, and my dad just like easily went past me, la-di-da, all the way up. And the next day, my legs were in a lot of pain, and I didn't really want to do something like that again. So he had another summit planned, but he said like, it's okay. You picked the hike. I picked like a very easy 30-minute waterfall hike. I think he was a bit disappointed, but he toned it down for me. So he was really a force, and he didn't get old fast. 5 years later, we took this bike trip. We went from Jasper to Banff, and that came about because he'd done the trip maybe 30 years earlier with his friend when I was very small. And I had Lucas then. He was small, and we weren't sure if we really wanted to do a trip of that magnitude. I asked him, can we do some other trip, bike somewhere else? And he said, no, this is the best trip ever. And I did it once before, and my dad liked to circle back to things that he liked, and he was very insistent we were going to do that just like he did it, or nothing at all. So we went, and it was for his 73rd birthday. And by then, I actually was able to keep pace with him. He'd slowed down enough. We biked along together. But after the first day, he seemed disappointed about that. Like, he didn't know why it was so much harder than last time, and he just said, oh man, I guess I am getting old. And then he thought about it, and he said, like, wait, I made a mistake here. Last time we rode from Banff to Jasper, and this time we're going Jasper to Banff, and this is uphill, and that was downhill. So it was too late then. We were a quarter of the way through, but I think he felt better about that. So I would say, though, the most important thing about my dad was this. And when he died, I got a series of messages from people, some from my neighbors. My dad used to come and watch my kids every week. And people kept saying how nice he was and so helpful, and that's what my kids were saying too. He was so nice, and they were right, but nice is so very inadequate for what I want to say. He was just so consistent. I mean, everyone can be nice. Everyone's nice sometimes, but over and over and over. I mean, I had all manner of moving all over the place when I was a young adult. Caused a variety of problems when I was a teenager. I needed lots of help with my kids when I was older, and just I cannot remember him ever saying no to any request for help. And not only that, but he never made you feel like you were imposing. His tone, his demeanor was like I was always welcome, even though sometimes I surely was imposing. And Carly will speak more about this, but when I was young, maybe from age 5 to 10 or so, he used to take us to visit an old relative, And this guy was not closely related to us. He was his cousin's uncle or his uncle's cousin, one of those. And somebody had asked him to do a favor and check in on this guy. He didn't have family, don't think he really had friends left. And it began that we would go there, I don't know, twice a month, just forever. We'd visit his house, and we'd visit him in the care home, and in the end we'd visit him in the hospital. And at the end, my dad organized a funeral, and there was almost no one there except me and Carly and Dad and maybe 2 other people. And it meant something to me at the time. I know I gave a speech about this guy at Remembrance Day. He was a veteran. I didn't really put it together until much later, though, that this was an unusual thing to just, he just kind of adopted this guy and saw that nobody else was visiting him, and he knew that it had to be done. And he also knew he had to show his kids that. And yeah, that was the first giant nice thing he did, and I think it really forged my character a little bit. I think it kind of went into my bones. And I remember other things after that. There were weddings, funerals. My dad would always mention, oh, there weren't many people there. I wanted to be there. Nobody from my work came to his colleague's wedding. I wanted to be there, so he knew, he knew somebody cared. And when my son was born, he was very, very sick, I suppose. He had a severe heart defect, and the first few months there, we had to. Melvin came with me for the first few times, but he had to go back to work, and I started going sometimes once a week, sometimes once every 2 weeks, once a month, depending. I'd take this little baby in. We'd go from test to test to test. And meanwhile, I still had to feed him and rock him and nap him in the hospital. And my dad, the first time I was going to go alone after Melvin went back to work, he offered to come with me, and I said, no, I can do it. And because I could pack him in the car, and I can rock him, and I can eat a granola bar with one hand, but he insisted, and he came there every time. And later on, every 6 months, and he came until 2020, when it was COVID, and they wouldn't let me take any extra people into the hospital. And yeah, he never missed a day, and I never had to go alone. And I always thought, it's like he was so good with his grandkids, and he always wanted to be with the grandkids, and I thought that was so nice. But I realize now that it was a bit about that, but it was more about he never stopped parenting. He knew how hard it would be for me to be alone. And he never said much, but he just kept coming and quietly take the baby, rock the baby so I could go eat. He'd be there in the car with me. And wow, it was so much harder when he stopped coming. It was really hard. So in the end, the last couple years, he did slow down. He was not really able to bike anymore, but he would still walk. He wasn't able to come over all the time, but he would still come once a week, and he always wanted to know if he could do something to help. He was often tired, but he would want to lie down and help Nina nap, or he would want to sit with the kids and watch Paw Patrol, or sit with them and read a book. And he would try to find things to do. If he saw me tying up the garbage, he wanted to take it out. He wanted to just keep helping with what he had. And the last time he came over was just before he died, maybe three or 4 days before, and he Lucas was going to tell the story, but I think I'll tell it for him. He built a fort with Lucas, and Lucas likes to build forts. So we have lots and lots of blocks in the playroom, but it really was like the biggest, most elaborate fort he's ever made. And I'm just really glad that was the last time I saw him. And he would have been happy that he could keep coming over and keep helping right until the end. And so during difficult times, my dad, he was a journalist for many years, and he studied English, and he did his crossword every day, so you'd think he's good with words, but not really around feelings and stuff. He didn't really know what to say when times were hard. But he was always there. He always showed up. So I think that will be his most enduring legacy. Even if you have nothing good to say, you can't think of it, just show up.
Thank you, Lorena, for those beautiful words. Now, Myron's daughter, Carly, will read her eulogy that she has prepared.
Lorena was right. I should have gone first. It's better to go first because now I'm going to cry. My dad was an understated kind of guy. He preferred a subtle joke to a long, sentimental speech. I was there when he gave his mother's eulogy in 2001, and he was utterly stoic from beginning to end. If he were here today, he might have said, "Don't lay it on too thick with the tributes." And all I can say to that is, I'll try my best, but I make no guarantees. He was a man of simple tastes. He liked meat and potatoes for dinner, a cheeseburger and a slice of homemade carrot cake on his birthday. He wore the same clothes for years, as my Aunt Doris mentioned. In 2024, you might still find him wearing the blue sweater from the Glen Eyre Elementary fundraiser that happened in around 1992, or that yellow striped polo shirt that we gave him the year he turned 40. I once came home with a fancy merino wool coat that I'd found at a thrift shop for $20, and I said, "Look, Dad, wasn't this a great deal?" And he looked at me and said, "Why would anyone give away a coat?" He owned a computer only so that he could keep in touch with people by email, and when he traveled, he always stayed in budget hotels. For a long time, there was a magnet on the fridge that said, "Money isn't everything, but it keeps the kids in touch." And I think it's true that he probably put aside more money for us than he ever spent on himself. Dad was also a man who liked his routines. I think that in recent years, it was probably possible to predict his location with a very high degree of accuracy just based on the day of the week and the time of day. 9:30 most mornings, he would be sitting at the kitchen table, peering down at the newspaper with his glasses in one hand, third cup of coffee by his side. "I need to finish this crossword puzzle," he would say, "or the crossword police will come and arrest me." By 10:30 or 11, he'd be out, usually on a long bike ride to Barnett Beach or Minnetonka Park or Sasamat Lake, and he'd come back up Snake Hill, a climb so grueling none of us ever wanted to join him. By 2 p.m., he was usually on the couch, snoring. On his lap, you might find a big book like a 700-page history of World War II, or our cat Marco, or on at least one occasion that I witnessed, both of them at the same time. By 5 p.m., he'd be chopping up a salad for dinner, and then he'd settle in for an evening watching the news or the hockey game or the latest Canadian contestant on Jeopardy! Every single Sunday at 10 a.m., he would call his sister Doris on the phone, a meeting he held so sacrosanct that I never bothered calling the landline on a Sunday because I knew I wouldn't get through. And every single Thursday, he drove to Langley to spend the day with Lorena and the kids. The last entry that he made on the calendar was for Thursday, May 30th, and it said, Lorena, 10 a.m. There was very little that could make him deviate from his routine, except for us. If Lorena needed a last-minute babysitter or I needed a ride from the airport, he would drop everything to help out. Dad was also famous for his stock phrases. When we went out in the car, he always said, "Allons-y." And when we came back, it was home again, jiggity jig. If Lorena and I didn't finish our dinner, it was waste not, want not. And if we complained about anything we couldn't have, it was beggars can't be choosers. If we tried to pull a fast one on him, he would always say, "You can't outfox the fox." Lorena and I just rolled our eyes, but I suppose that's what dads are for, making their children roll their eyes a little bit. So he was a creature of habit in some ways, but in other ways his life was ever-changing and ever-evolving. He moved around as a child, from Rich Lake to Ashmont to Jasper Place. He went to the University of Alberta at the age of just 17 and got a degree in English Lit before he turned 20. In the years that elapsed between his graduation and his meeting my mom, I'm not entirely sure what happened. He had so many odd jobs in so many different places that I can't even begin to list them, and half of them I probably don't know about. I only know about that at all from random stories he would tell. He would suddenly come in, blurt in, "Oh, that reminds me of that summer that I spent working at a grain silo in Lethbridge." Or, "Yeah, I met this crazy guy when I was hitchhiking in Greece." And we'd sort of look at him and be like, "Okay, what do I not know about this guy?" He met my mother on October 30th, 1972. I know the exact date because it was the night of the federal election, and they were both at a party watching the results come in. Now, this is 10 years before I was born, but I've always had a very clear picture in my head of what Dad was like at that time, from photos I've seen and from stories I've been told. So let me paint you a picture for those of you who only knew my dad in more recent years. Picture my dad, age 27, shoulder-length curly hair, polyester bell-bottoms, and a t-shirt that said, "Happiness is never having to say you're Tory." lying on the floor with his head on his hand, watching the TV and cheering as the NDP got 6 new seats. Now, his political views shifted over the years. They moved right or left on different issues. But that was Myron Johnson in 1972, a long-haired political junkie cheering for the NDP in a province where they had never won a federal seat. By that time, he was doing his master's degree, and in 1974, he published a thesis titled "The Failure of the CCF in Alberta, an Accident of History." I knew about his thesis when I was a kid because it was published in book form, and I found it on the shelf downstairs. And when he explained what it was to 10-year-old me, I thought it sounded really boring. And in the years since then, I've wondered if it still had any relevance. Last week, after he died, I was Googling his name, and I found this new research paper from April of 2021. It's called "Contagion in the West, the Survival and Success of the CCF NDP in Western Canada" by Connor John Molyneux. And my dad's thesis is cited in it over a dozen times. And I wish that I had found this sooner, because if Dad had known about that, he would have been just so delighted. Dad held a whole series of interesting jobs through the 80s and 90s, and he rarely spoke about them in detail, and many people in this room might not know about them. He was a political advisor and a speechwriter for Grant Notley in the early 1980s, and he met Grant's daughter, the future Premier Rachel Notley, when she was a child. He was a reporter for the Edmonton Journal and a producer for CBC Radio Vancouver. And for most of my childhood, he ran communications for what was then the BC Tel Workers Union, researching, writing, and printing their newspaper pretty much single-handedly. I remember, as a child during this period, thinking that my dad must be a celebrity, because one of his jobs was to record a weekly message on the union hotline, just sort of an audio newsletter that BC Tel employees could call to find out the latest news. And I would call that number and listen to my dad's voice and think, wow, all these people call this number every day just so they can hear what my dad has to say. Toward the end of his career at the Telecommunications Workers Union, he started taking on this kind of pseudo-legal work. He would argue appeals before the Workers' Compensation Board for employees whose initial claims had been denied. Now, he would be the first to tell you that he didn't have a law degree. He ended up doing this work because the union got wise to the fact that Myron Johnson was very good at arguing a point, and he cost a lot less than the real lawyer that they had on call. So he took on more and more cases, traveled to these boards in Nanaimo and Kamloops and Prince George, and racked up a long list of victories. And I think that this was some of the most satisfying work that he did in his career. He often said that he might have liked to pursue a law degree if it weren't for all of those years articling and memorizing precedents. And I think that this work at the end of his career gave him a lot of satisfaction and kind of proved to himself that he could have been a lawyer or could have done something very different if he had wanted to. He had a whole series of side projects too. In the early 90s, I remember he and my mom took a sailing course at Jericho Beach. He did a financial securities certificate, and he never did anything with it professionally, but I'm sure it allowed him to poke some holes in any advice he got from his financial advisor, which he would have enjoyed. He learned to play a little guitar, and he told me that E minor was his favorite chord because it sounded so nice and it was so easy to play. He could swear in at least 4 languages that I know of, and he could also pull off a pretty reasonable semblance of fluency. And when he met my mom's parents, who were deaf, he learned American Sign Language well enough to have a conversation with them. He hiked the West Coast Trail, biked from Banff to Jasper, and Jasper to Banff, trekked across a lot of Australia, New Zealand, and Europe, ran a full marathon in 4 hours, 52 minutes, and 35 seconds, which he liked to tell people just barely qualifies. He said, "I walked the last hour, but it counts." After he retired, he continued taking on odd jobs. He spent a winter working at the cafeteria up at Cypress Mountain so that he could get a free ski pass. And he volunteered with Meals on Wheels and served on their board. He didn't have to do this work, but he wanted to stay active and stay connected to people. Dad was a devoted caretaker to many cats and one very energetic dog. I will most fondly remember him with Marco, our cat from the year 2000 to 2018. Mom had the opportunity to adopt this kitten, and Dad said very loudly that we did not need the responsibility of another cat. But within days of adopting him, it was clear that Dad was Marco's favorite, and Dad could not say no to him. So hardly a day went by that Dad did not scoop Marco up in the evening like a newborn baby with his paws sticking up in the air and carry him down to his cat bed in the basement. Dad took care of other people too, as many people have said already today. After Lorena was born, he actually took 6 months of paternity leave, which was really unusual at the time. And I was only 4, but I still remember him taking us down to Rocky Point Park back when it was just a mud flat with the dock sticking out into the water. And he would always let us stop at the donut shop on the way back, and he would let me pick out a donut and eat the whole thing. And of course, Lorena's spoken about his incredible devotion to her family after Lucas was born. Lorena told you the story about Archie, the World War II vet that Dad started visiting. What I remember about him is that he was a vet, he was an alcoholic, he had this bachelor pad in East Van, and he had these 3 cats that were kind of his cats, but also kind of ran free around the streets of Vancouver. And he chain smoked all day. And sometimes we'd go and he'd be really charming and talkative, and other days he would just kind of be drinking and not want to talk too much. And my dad would try to engage him in conversation without too much success. And like Lorena, I've looked back on that period now and started to think about what a strange commitment that was, that Dad continued visiting this man every Saturday, even after the rest of us had mostly stopped. When Archie went into a nursing home, Dad went back to that apartment he'd had in East Van, and he found the cats. And we adopted one of them. It was a black cat with very long fangs that old Archie had named Satan. And when Archie moved to the hospital, Dad kept visiting. And when Archie died and no one was around to help, he organized the funeral. And Dad had the priest give the eulogy at the funeral based on information that my dad had told him about Archie. And then the priest gave the eulogy, and he made a really big deal about how Archie was this saint, and he had served his country so valiantly in the war, and he had rehabilitated all these stray cats around the Lower Mainland. And throughout the speech, the priest kept referring to Satan the cat as Satin the cat. And Dad diplomatically bit his tongue, but he laughed about it for many years afterwards. So in terms of Archie, I think that part of this was a sense of duty. Dad had a sense of duty to his family. And I think it was more than that too. I remember him telling me that when he was a producer at CBC Radio, he had worked on this story about Steve Fagno, who was a cancer survivor and an amputee who ran across Canada for cancer research. So he ran across Canada after Terry Fox did, but he actually finished the run. Unlike Terry Fox, Steve Fagno was a bit of a grouch and had an alcohol problem, and I think by the time the interview ran, he had already racked up at least 1 DUI. But Dad was interested in the Steve Fagno story because it challenged people's ideas about who we should celebrate and why. Dad never minded misfits or contrarians or people who were a bit difficult. Maybe it was the lawyer in him. He believed that everyone deserved a fair hearing. Dad had slowed down a lot in the last couple of years. He went out less. He spent a lot more time at home. He would watch the neighbors coming and going from the big window in the house at the top of the hill. If you lived on Cecile Place at all in those years, he knew if you were home or not. He cut back his long bike rides until he was just going out for walks, and he didn't always keep in touch with friends as closely as he once did. He was more focused on his family. He knew that he was slowing down and getting a bit forgetful, but he was always self-deprecating about it. He would joke about being put in a home for the bewildered or a home for the befuddled. And if he ever complained about aging, he always added, well, it's better than the alternative. The isolation of the pandemic hit him hard, as did the loss of his brother Bruce in early 2023. But he found a lot to enjoy too. He loved it when my family came to visit from Ottawa and we were all together. He always wanted to know how my work was going, and he always had insightful questions about Parliament. He loved spending time with Eric and Melvin, his sons-in-law. To say that Dad approved of our husbands would be an understatement. He was thrilled to have some men in the house that he genuinely connected with and with whom he could talk politics or exchange barbecue tips. And let's be honest, he also loved having an excuse to crack out the kokanee at 4 p.m. Most of all, he reveled in his grandchildren. He never had anything bad to say about them, and he would always just look at them and shake his head and say, wow, they're all so good looking. In the last year of his life, he managed to attend 3 significant family events. Last May, he made a final trip out to Ottawa for Alex's 3rd birthday. In June, we celebrated my parents' 50th wedding anniversary. And in October, we traveled to Edmonton for a family reunion with his siblings and his family, a trip that I know meant a great deal to him. Had he stayed around a little bit longer, he would have found many more things to enjoy. He would have been delighted at the news that the former US president was indicted. He would have been thrilled that the Oilers made the playoffs, even if they did beat the Canucks. He would have loved to see the beautiful weather that we finally started getting on Thursday, which would have been his 79th birthday. And most of all, he would have been so happy to see your faces here today and to know that his family is together watching the service from Alberta. One of the habits Dad developed in the last couple of years was counting heads to make sure that we were all there. So by all of us, I mean Mom and Dad, my family, and Lorena's family. When I last visited in March, that meant 3 kids aged 8, 3, and 3, and 5 adults trying to chase them down. And anyone who knows anything about kids this age knows that trying to count them is completely futile. On the day I'm thinking of, we'd taken them to Rocky Point Park. Lucas took off his shoes and ran straight into the mudflats. Alex got stuck at the top of the slide, crying and holding up a line of kids. And Nina had picked a fight with a much larger child because she wanted to steer the pirate ship. We were running in 3 different directions all afternoon trying to keep on top of them. And Dad stood there counting. 1, 2, 3. Who's with Lucas? 4, 5, 6. Where did Alex go? Like I said, totally futile. The only thing that worked to get them all in one place was buying them ice cream, which is what we did. And I remember thinking, Dad, like, what are you doing? But I knew why he did it. It was the one thing he cared about the most. He wanted to make sure that we were all accounted for. Today there are only 8 of us. And that's a problem because 5 adults is not enough to wrangle those 3 children. But we're not alone either. And I want to take a minute to thank the people who have supported us in the last 2 weeks. Ruth and Richard were with my mom that first awful day, and they didn't let her be alone. Steve and Alessia have been keeping us fed and helping us with all of the technical preparation for the service. I want to thank everyone who traveled to be here, but very especially my dad's sister Doris, who flew out from Calgary. I want to thank everyone who dropped by and sent flowers and food, and who spoke to me on the phone to tell me how much my dad meant to them. He would have been so incredibly touched. I want to conclude by saying just a few words about the dad that I knew when I was a child. Like Lorena said, he was never overly demonstrative or sentimental. I can count on one hand the number of times that he gave me any direct advice. But he taught by example, and he taught us through the books that he chose for us, books that reflected his sensibilities and values. We started with Frog and Toad and Owl at Home. Then we moved on to Black Beauty and Little House on the Prairie and Charlotte's Web. These were books about ordinary people, or animals, who spent time together, bonded through shared domestic routines, took care of each other, teased each other, and made a life out of what they had. As I was working on this eulogy, I was looking through the bookshelves to see if I could find any passage from a book that might be relevant. And instead I happened upon this book of crossword puzzles. So I pulled it out and saw that he had filled in every little box with his careful handwriting, except for the very last page, which was blank, and the second to last page, which had only been half completed. And it seemed so strange to me because it wasn't like my dad to leave things unfinished. I wondered if he had gotten stuck on one of the clues or gotten distracted, or maybe someone had picked it up and reshelved it, not realizing that there was still so much more for him to do. When someone you love dies suddenly, you're left with so many questions. How could this have happened? What were his final wishes? What would I have said if I'd had the chance to say goodbye? But looking back through all the photos and books, talking to people closest to him, I've realized that the questions that really matter, we already have the answers to. If you want to know what kind of a man my dad was, what mattered to him, how he felt about us, it's all there in those 148 and a half pages that I'm so happy he had the chance to fill in. He was a country boy who loved high culture, who listened to Haydn and took his kids to see the cathedrals of Paris, but who never lost touch with his roots. He was a man who thought that clothes are something you wear to keep warm, and technology is something you use to keep in touch with people. He was a husband, father, brother, and friend who showed up for people when it counted. He was a beautiful writer who believed that words matter and stories can heal. After I put the crossword book away, I went looking for a copy of Charlotte's Web. Dad read that to us when I was about 7, and I remember I had always found the ending so hard to bear. Near the end, Charlotte is tired and sick, and she knows that she's going to die. But her friend Wilbur the pig doesn't know that yet. She tells him that everything will be okay. Nothing can harm you now. These autumn days will shorten and grow cold. The leaves will shake loose from the trees and fall. Christmas will come, then the snows of winter. You will live to enjoy the beauty of the frozen world. Winter will pass, the days will lengthen, the ice will melt in the pasture pond. The song sparrow will return and sing. The frogs will awake. The warm wind will blow again. When Wilbur asks Charlotte why she helped him, she says, "You've been my friend." That in itself is a tremendous thing. I wove my webs for you because I liked you. After all, what's a life anyway? We're born, we live a little while, we die. A spider's life can't help being something of a mess with all this trapping and eating flies. By helping you, perhaps I was trying to lift up my life a trifle. Heaven knows anyone's life can stand a little of that. I've been so busy the last 2 weeks, taking care of the preparations and speaking to people, that everything has felt very unreal. I've had this feeling that if I look through all the photo albums and pick out the very best ones, if I gather as much information I can about my dad and get all of those most compelling bits into the eulogy, if I can convey something true to you about my dad, and if I can put his life on the record, as it were, that I might summon him back somehow. That I will finish reading this speech, and when I open my eyes, everything will be back to normal. I'll walk into the kitchen, and Dad will be there, sitting at the table, peering down at the newspaper, his glasses in one hand and a third cup of coffee by his side. And he'll look up and say, "Hi, Carly. I just have to finish this crossword puzzle, or the crossword police will come and arrest me." But the speech is almost over, and if I can't summon him back, I will need to summon something different. Some of my dad's stoicism, his patience, and his sense of humor, so that I can get through the world without him.
Thank you, Carly, for that beautiful tribute. Now, in just a moment, the final piece of today's ceremony will come up, which will be a slideshow of Myron's life. The slideshow includes 79 photos representing the number of years that he lived. It is set to one of his favorite songs, The Mary Ellen Carter by Stan Rogers. Once the slideshow is complete, that will conclude today's service. Following the slideshow, you can exit to the left, where light snacks and refreshments will be served. Thank you again for coming and joining us today.
She went down last October in a pouring, driving rain. The skipper, he'd been drinking and the mate, he felt no pain. Too close to 3 Mile Rock and she was dealt her mortal blow, and the Mary Ellen Carter settled low. There was just us 5 aboard her when she finally was awash. We'd worked like hell to save her, all heedless of the cost. And the groan she gave as she went down, it caused us to proclaim that the Mary Ellen Carter would rise again. Well, the owners rode her off, not a nickel would they spend. She gave 20 years of service, boys, that met her sorry end. But insurance paid the loss to us, so let her rest below. Then they laughed at us and said we had to go. But we talked of her all winter, some days around the clock. She's worth $250,000 afloating at the dock. And with every jar that hit the bar, we swore we would remain and make the Mary Ellen Carter rise again. Rise again, rise again. Let her name not be lost to the knowledge of men. All those who loved her best and were with her till the end will make the Mary Ellen Carter rise again. All spring now we've been with her on a barge led by a friend. 3 dives a day in a hard hat suit and twice I've had the bends. Thank God it's only 60 feet and the currents here are slow, or I'd never have the strength to go below. But we patched her ends, stopped her vents, dog action porthole down, put cables to her fore and aft and girded her around. Tomorrow noon we hit the air and then take up the strain and make the Mary Ellen Carter rise again. Rise again, rise again. Let her name not be lost to the knowledge of men. All those who loved her best and were with her till the end will make the Mary Ellen Carter rise again. For we couldn't leave her there, you see, to crumble into scale. She'd saved our lives so many times, living through the gale. And the laughing drunken rats who left her to a sorry grave, they won't be laughing in another day. And you to whom adversity has dealt the final blow, with smiling bastards lying to you everywhere you go, turn to and put out all your strength of arm and heart and brain, and like the Mary Ellen Carter rise again. Rise again, rise again. Though your heart it be broken and life about to end, no matter what you've lost, be it a home, a love, a friend, like the Mary Don't let them fool you, or even try to school you. Oh no, we've got to mind our own. So go to hell if what you're thinking is not right. Love would never leave us alone. I in the darkness, you must come out the light. Could you be loved and be loved? Could you be
I shall now do a speech.